Good morning, everybody. This is Tom Briggs from Jagged Globe. Thanks for joining us this morning. Just going to wait for a few more people to join over the next few minutes. But yeah, this is the first of a series of presentations, interviews and discussions about mountaineering, trekking and skiing with Jagged Globe leaders and guides that we're planning to do over the next few weeks. So today we're going to talk to Ed Chard about climbing in Greenland, but also over the next few weeks we'll have mountain guide Andy Owen, who will be here next week to discuss ski touring and ski mountaineering. We'll have expedition leader and leader of, well, he was supposed to be this year's Everest expedition, Robert Mads Andersen, and he'll be talking about everything to do with Everest. Also coming up, we've got David Hamilton, who'll be, many of you will know, very experienced expedition leader. He's going to be talking about climbing in the Karakoram. David's probably done more mountaineering in Pakistan than any other Brit. Mara Larson, she's going to give us the inside track on Aconcagua, having led multiple expeditions to the highest mountain outside of the Himalayas over the last few seasons. And we're also going to hear from Mungo Ross, who is expedition leader, trek leader and instructor, who spent the last 50 years working in the mountains, and you know, he's been involved with Jagged Globe for sort of 30 odd years. But our speaker today, as I say, is Ed Chard. Ed travelled to Greenland in 2017 to explore new peaks on the east coast there, and he's due to lead a team again this coming July. Though of course that remains to be seen whether that trip will happen. The format of today's session will be a 40-minute presentation followed by sort of up to 20 minutes of Q&A. I mean, I will interject in suitable places with your questions, which you can ask on the Q&A function, and I might have some other questions of my own, but I'm going to hand you over to Ed now, and he's going to talk through some of these slides from Greenland.
Hi everyone, greetings from a very cloudy Sheffield. Nice to see you all. Hello to those that know me. This is quite a new experience. I'm very used to standing in front of lots and lots of people talking about mountaineering and guiding and leading trips, but this is the first time I've ever sat in front of a camera looking out of my window in the middle of Sheffield, looking at a park, talking to gosh knows how many folk. So bear with me, and I'll hopefully talk to you a lot about what I know about Greenland and my experiences there in 2017. I know you can see the pictures as I'm talking about them as well, so we'll talk through sort of the whole group of pictures. I should make it very clear straight away, particularly looking at this beautiful photo that you're looking at now. Alan Richardson and Alan Richardson, who's a British mountain guide, very well known to us at Jagged Globe, and has been guiding for many years for us. Took a lot of these photos, so there's some of Alan, some of mine. The good ones are Alan's, frankly, and the other ones are mine. But this is a really nice sort of snapshot, I suppose. This particular picture for me sort of covers Greenland as a single picture. It's like no other place I've been to before, to be honest. It's like the Himalayas, but the sea is so close to the glaciers and the mountains. So it's an incredible place. Very unexplored. Tiny amounts of population. Greenland itself is a huge country, you know, stretching, you know, a long way north, and you know, it's got a huge width to it as well. It's only inhabited in the sort of east and west coast. The central part isn't inhabited at all. So all these pictures are from a trip in July 2017. Alan and I led a team of 10 climbers to this area. And the trip starts in this place where these photos are, in Kullersuk. Kullersuk is about an hour's flight from Iceland. So our trip started in, obviously, in the UK, flies to Iceland. You have an overnight in Iceland, then fly the following day over to Kullersuk. Kullersuk is inhabited by Inuit. So they are there all year round. It's not a seasonal town, but it's pretty cut off from everywhere. You can only get to it, fly to it, obviously, and that's one flight a day, or the rest of the time is boats. The local people that are there are pretty much sort of subsistence farmers and inhabitants. They're there all the way through the winter. And of course, their way for getting around in the winter is using these huskies. So every house will have 3 or 4, 5 in some cases, big dogs tied up outside. Beautiful dogs, huge dogs, but fierce. And they're out all the time, and they're all chained up, and they get fed like this lad is feeding them now. Seal. So seals are shot and caught locally as a foodstuff, mainly for dogs, but also local people eat it as well. Alan, this photo makes me laugh a little bit. This is Alan and I. I'm quite big, I think it's fair to say. Alan is normal size. We didn't actually have an idea when this photo was taken that behind us is the village graveyard. This shouldn't be a starter for the sort of trip at all. This is our first day. So we arrive in Kullersuk at about 10 AM from a flight from Iceland. We walk from the airstrip. It's a very basic airstrip. 30 minutes down to a little port, I suppose, really. And there's some huts and things there. And that first day that we were there was actually quite an important day. It was a day of provisioning. It was a day of getting stuff sorted, because once we leave that small town, then we're off then for the whole time that we're in Greenland. So it was a whole bunch of getting food ready. All of the food that we had was dehydrated. So the only thing we were cooking on a day-to-day basis was dehydrated breakfasts and evening meals. And then the lunches were, as this suggests, big bags of nuts and fruit, and then biscuits and wraps and various things like that as well. So it was a big amount of kit that you had to get ready. Loading up this little trailer after a night's sleep in this hut took us down to the port to load up some boats. And we were going to travel from here to this little township over to an island called a Pusii Island, which is the sort of first stage of the trip. So we deliberately went to this first island that's about 40 minutes away from Kullersuk. Again, very remote, nothing else there. We were camping, but it was an idea for us to get to know each other. It's quite a big group and 2 guides. They get to know us, we get to know them, check out some skills, do a bit of training, go to a peak where people had been to before. So it was a bit of a known outcome, but it was a bit of a sort of a training 2 or 3 days first, really. Stunning location. The boat that we travelled over in was pretty quick, I have to say. In Greenland, it became very obvious that boats have 2 speeds, very fast and stop. There was no in-between speed at all. So we cracked over this bay at high speed, weaving in and out of these little icebergs and then pulling up on the shore. Stunning island, amazing. Grassy around, I suppose, the sea fringes, and then pretty quickly it gets rocky. Rivers coming down from all the glaciers, and then vast glaciers, maybe 1 kilometre from the edge of the sea, going up to some pretty remote peaks, really. Rocky, all in nature, so glacial approaches, and then little rognons or rocky peaks sort of coming out of the top, and quite broken as well, because geologically this is an area that's quite young. It's covered in ice the rest of the year, so it's still sort of adapting. It's what the Himalayas would have been, gosh, I don't know, 500 million years ago or something. This is a good example, really big, wide open glaciers, pretty crevassed in places because of the shape and the fact that they go around so many corners and things. So you have to be really careful. We're obviously roping up across all that glacial travel. And with the two of us, we split ourselves across the group. So we had two smaller groups, either end of the party, and then the middle party were individually roped. So we're moving as sort of 3 teams. You'll see strapped on my back there is a rifle. We'll talk more about polar bears in a bit, but a rifle, both Alan and I had a rifle. We kept that rifle with us the whole time as we're sort of traveling around. It's very, very strange experience, you know, having something like that on your back. I'm used to ice screws and, you know, things being on you as you travel over that sort of terrain, but a rifle on your back was a bit weird as well. We left it just short of the peaks, so didn't actually take it right to the summits, but effectively it stayed with us the whole time. And as I say, we'll talk more about why we had that and stuff a little bit later on. But this particular section of the trip, traveling over the ice and getting to these small peaks. It was a really good opportunity. Check out everyone's crevasse rescue skills, cramponing, climbing. Everyone that was on this trip was pretty experienced. It's definitely an intermediate trip. It's not a first time trip at all. So everyone was in a position where they had a good foundation of knowledge, but it certainly needed pulling back together and sharpening up and stuff like that. So this made us a really good opportunity to do that. So yeah, okay, great. So this is a really good example of the sort of rocky peaks that we sort of get into. Like if you looked at that in the Alps, you'd think there's no way I'm going anywhere near that. It's really, really loose. That's me in the front there, and there's a fair bit of route finding, of weaving around trying to find the best route. There are no paths at all, even though on this particular peak someone had been to before. There's still no paths and still no routes. It changes obviously every year. So we were weaving in and around of some quite sort of broken, shattered rock. Obviously sticking to ridges as much as you can, and at the top it gets sort of quite snowy. And it's pretty solid right at the top, but getting up to those flanks, you know, is pretty interesting really. Again, it's like the Alps would have been hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So fascinating to get there. And stunning, absolutely stunning. You get to the top of this is our first peak that we got to. Stunning place. I mean, imagine a rocky peak surrounded by glaciers, surrounded by snow-capped mountains, and what, 1 kilometre, 2 kilometres on beyond that is the sea. And you know, you can just see it in the background there, dotted with icebergs. It's an absolutely stunning place. Everyone got there, everyone got to the top. Yeah, amazing first peak.
So just interrupting you there, Ed, I mean, yeah, the weather looks absolutely amazing in all of these photos. Was it like that for the whole trip? Is that typical, or were you just really lucky with the weather that season?
Yeah, I think a bit of both actually. Alan had been to Greenland, what, 5 or 6 times before. And so I had far greater experience than I had of Greenland. But talking to local people and the other guides we met there, we were pretty lucky, but it is stable. Yeah, it's only a little bit further north in Scotland in terms of its latitude, and is pretty stable. It's a massive landmass. And so particularly on eastern Greenland, you know, you can expect there to be pretty good weather. Most of the prevailing weather comes, as ours does, westerly across the main part of Greenland. And so the main storms and things are, you know, dealt with on the western side of the landmass, I guess, really. So yeah, we were pretty lucky. We were there, what, 16 days? And I think we had 2 days of sort of cloudy, showery weather, but the rest of it, yeah, it's stunning. And windless as well. You know, it's yeah, absolutely stunning.
Okay, so we're just going to bring up a slide here of a polar bear. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So tell us a bit more about this sort of. It's one of the things people ask about if they're sort of interested in going to Greenland. Yeah. You know, how likely it is that you might see a polar bear. What the sort of protocols are that you might have in place on a trip like this, in case you do come across one. Yeah. I mean, what happened on this trip?
Well, this is anyone that knows me. I'm laughing because anyone that knows me has heard this story 100 times. So I'll talk about that in two sections. This story firstly. So we're at Pusi Island and we're going off to our next trip, our next base camp, and we do that via boat. So the Inuit drivers, 2 boat drivers, came in and picked us up and took us from the one island to the next. It's about a 2-hour journey in these boats. Again, hyper fast, going down these really wide fields, maybe 1,000 meters, 1,500 meters across. And we've seen all sorts of wildlife on the way. Seals, we've seen some whales, some minke, things like that. We get a little bit further down this field, it gets to about 900 meters across. And the driver said, oh, you know, there's something up ahead. It didn't speak English, but it, you know, indicated that something was coming. So I turned around to the folks in the boat and said, oh, it's probably a whale, you know, it's probably something like that. And of course, we get a bit closer, and it's not a whale, it's this polar bear. There's a male polar bear, and he's swimming from one side of the field to the other. And he's huge, absolutely huge. I've seen polar bears, I'm sure like a lot of us, have seen polar bears in, you know, zoos and things in the past. But this one was massive. It must have been about 5 to 6 meters long, I reckon, in terms of its nose to its back of its feet. And it was just sort of plodding through the water, huge, great paws, just swimming from one side to the other. We apparently weren't at any risk at all. The Inuit drivers assured us. We stayed a good distance, as you can see from this picture, but it wouldn't attack you if we are on land or a boat and it's in water, because it hasn't got any perches. It can't get out. Different story if it's on land and we're in water. That's its natural hunting habitat. So we spent maybe 10 minutes with it, something like that, just circling around, taking some photos. And it had been travelling across directly from one side of the field to the other. When we set off and we started going again in our boats, I look back and I'll never forget the fact that instead of it swimming from one side to the other, it then very, very gradually changed its route and started swimming in the direction that we were going. It's a little bit concerning. So that brings me on to, well, what do we do? What do we do about bears? If they're in the water, great, take pictures, and it's fantastic. I think that the biggest single thing is that we prevent bears getting anywhere near us. So we camp in small groups. We make sure any food, anything that a bear would be interested in, is away from that camping group. It's separate. We surround the tents with a bear wire, so it's like a trip wire, 3-4 meters away from tents. If you're in a smaller group, but you're in a bigger group, as we were here, you actually have a bear watch. So someone stays up as a sentry in effect and keeps an eye open. And if they see something moving, then they're sort of going to wake everyone else up, and everyone gets up and becomes alert and stuff. And don't forget, it's 24-hour sunlight, or daylight, I should say. So you're going to be able to see things really, really clearly. This was our second camp here. So to be able to see something coming up the glacier was pretty easy, actually. So you're not actually going to get snuck up on at all. So prevention is definitely the way forward. But as I've already suggested, Alan and I also did have hunting rifles with us, with you know, with full rounds that we could have shot a bear with, and both of us are used to using firearms. That, to be quite honest, would be an absolute last resort, you know, because that would mean a polar bear would be pretty close to you. That would be 10-20 meters away, and that would be, you know, coming to attack you. I mean, the thought of shooting a polar bear would fills me with dread. But you know, that would be our last resort, really. Luckily, we didn't have to do that. We didn't see the polar bear again. And I should say, as I say, Alan has been going there for many years. That was the first polar bear Alan had seen in that sense, and that sort of close. So it is very, very rare. I was incredibly lucky, you know, first time there to be able to see it. This picture here gives you a good idea of this camp. This next camp that we got to, high up on a glacier. So we camped for a night next to the field, next to the sea. And then the following couple of days, we walked up to this high camp and we did some peaks from here. A nice story happened here. We were on bear watch, again from this sort of camp, 2-3 days after the bear sighting. And I'm looking down the glacier. Everyone else is in bed. I'm sat up. It was about 10, 11 at night, something like that. And I see some movement in the rocks, maybe 100 meters away, something like that. So there's no birds around, there's no rodents, there's no things like that you'd see in other glaciers around the world. So immediately I think it's a polar bear. So my hand's on the rifle straight away. And this thing kept moving. I'm stood up looking a bit concerned. And eventually, of course, this thing appeared. It wasn't a polar bear, a lot smaller. It was an Arctic fox. So it clearly had never seen human beings before, and it just came for a visit. And it came back every night at about the same sort of time, and it came to visit me every night. So I gave it tiny little bits of cheese over sort of 2 or 3 different nights. Yeah, wonderful sighting. So yeah, back to the climbing and mountaineering. So now we're climbing new peaks. So we've climbed peaks that people have been to before on the other island. We're now getting to places where people hadn't been before. Similar type of approach, glacial approach, long, maybe 2, 3, 4 hour glacial approach, rocky peaks, and then some snowy ridges to the summits. But again, stunning locations. I mean, this particular peak, this is a real thumb of rock that sticks its way up out the glacier. It's a wonderful snowy ridge that gets to a little rocky summit. It's a really sheer drop on the other side. Big cliffs, maybe 300-400 meters down to the glacier itself. And then looking all the way back down the glacier that we've walked up sort of previously. And again, everyone gets to the top. We're talking, what, these summits are about 1,000 meters, so a bit like Ben Nevis, I suppose, a bit like a Scottish peak, I suppose, really. But you're going from sea level.
And everybody looks quite lightly dressed there. I mean,
yeah.
What the sort of temperatures like typically? It doesn't look like you sort of need a big down jacket.
No, not at all. So this is probably lunchtime, I guess, something like that, on a typical day when we were there. So people are climbing, as you can see, they're in t-shirts. This is the sort of hardest working of the day, so people had stripped down a little bit. So people are wearing soft shell, maybe a soft shell jacket, a thin fleece layer underneath, and a t-shirt. For the most part, that sort of sorts you out for most of the day. The temperature range is pretty wide. The coldest it got to was probably minus, on the glacier, -3, -4, something like that at night, and then plus 17, 18, something like that on the glaciers during the day. So a pretty decent range. Sun was a big issue, like on any glacier, I suppose, really. But because the weather was so bright, you're having to protect yourself a lot. Yeah, not only just top of your head, but underneath your chin and stuff like that as well. So people had glacial glasses on the whole time, really, as they were travelling around. And then we had light down jackets at night. So when the sun went in, the sun disappears behind this ridge here. Our camp was at the base of that cliff. So when the sun disappears behind that, the temperature goes down by about 10 degrees straight away. It's that you lose the sun. So yeah, light clothing. Certainly no need for a massive Himalayan down jacket. I had maybe a sort of 3 to 4 season sleeping bag, and a maybe 600 fill light down jacket and a gilet, something like that. So yeah, not heavyweight at all, really. In terms of boots, alpine boots or light double boots, but certainly no need for a massive double boot, because you're doing some quite technical rock climbing as well. So you're walking over wet-ish glaciers, so you need a decent boot, but then you also need a bit of feel to sort of scramble to the moderate diff, in some places the odd move of V diff rock climbing to get to the summits. So yeah, you need a really good sort of versatile pair of boots, really. Yeah.
And compared to, obviously a lot of the trips that we run, there's a lot of support from local staff. We can see you've got the Inuit taking you up the fjords and into the base camps, but then you're sort of on your own. So presumably, team members need to be a bit more involved in sort of camp life, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anyone that's done a trip, as you say, in the Himalayas will be used to, sort of camp staff, will be used to a mess tent, will be used to a cook tent, will be used to sort of 3 square meals a day. This is a very different trip. It was only us. There wasn't any other support staff at all. As you say, it was just transportation that was taking us around. So everyone was involved in getting water, melting snow, melting ice, At the first camp we were at, we were melting iceberg, which was pretty cool. So we were putting big lumps of ice into the stove pots. We were cooking off fuel, so we were cooking off white gas, so pressured petrol stoves, whisper lights in this case. So everyone had to get to know how to use those and use them safely. So there was refilling of those, getting water, cooking, sharing that water, you know, and a fair bit of sort of working together. Yeah, certainly if you want to do a trip where you want to be handed on, you wanted to be weighted on hand and foot, this isn't a trip. This is definitely a trip of getting involved and being in charge of your own food as well, and being in charge of your own rationing. So it's up to you what you eat at what stage. So there's a fair bit of that, really, a fair bit of that. But obviously Alan and I were there to assist and help as well. You know, it wasn't like, right, see you in the morning, I'm off. It was very much a very, very close knit sort of group. You know, lots of storytelling and lots of sharing experiences and stuff. So sort of quite close living, really. This is now moving on to our last couple of peaks that we did from that same camp. And these again were new peaks. These were a little more technical, so we were sort of upping it in terms of everything that we did on a day-by-day basis. So there were some pretty technical ridges that we went along as well in our sort of smaller teams. So often Alan and I were leading sections, and then other groups were then sort of coming up behind us and then clipping into the anchors and things that we'd made. So Alan and I were there all the time, but it wasn't like you would find in the Alps. There's a guide strapped to 2 clients the whole time, or 1 client the whole time. This was a little more loose. We were getting people to do some of their own belaying, lead some easier sections. Yeah, it was quite fluid in the way that we were doing things. And then descending, sometimes by abseil, descending by ropes moving together. So a real sort of mixed bag, really.
Okay, and this is a good question that somebody's just posted. Obviously, the idea behind this trip, you know, it's an exploratory style trip with the sort of objective of doing first ascents, and they've said, you know, can you be sure that no one else has been on a particular peak? There are no central records of summits, are there? You know, for Greenland. How do you know that nobody else has done it? Yeah,
that's right. Well, there are some records, but they're quite loose, and of course. It's unlike in the UK where we have new route books. So the moment you think you've done a new route, a rock climb, let's say in the UK, you go to a well-known place and you look at the new route book. There isn't something like that in Greenland. So most of the time you are going to places where there's no human habitation at all, and there's no chance that anyone has been there before because of previous records. However, you know, in some cases, and this was the case on one peak that we got to, not this peak, but a previous photo. We thought we absolutely were the first ever to be there. We didn't see any other sign of any human sort of involvement whatsoever, and got to the very top of this peak. And blow me, if we got right to the top, there was this tiny little cairn of rocks. You know, polar bears don't make cairns. So we sort of uncovered this cairn a little bit, and right in the middle of it was a little tin, and in it was a little note from the Italian Alpine Club, and they'd been there in the 60s. So there were no records of this journey whatsoever anywhere. So we sent this note back to the Italian Alpine Club, and it turns out it was some servicemen that were there in Kullersuk in the 60s. And decided to go off climbing for a few days. So there is always the chance that someone has been there before, but you know, it isn't in any guidebooks. It's not recorded. And although the peaks that we did record in now, there's a reasonable record of where people have been to before. But you know, it's still very much discovery mountaineering, and you're certainly going to places that, you know, even if they have been visited, they would have been visited a very, very long time ago, you know. So yeah, it's cutting edge stuff, really.
And on that, note of there being so few people there. I mean, I remember it's a few years ago since I went to Greenland, and that was in the south. But I just remember, you know, overwhelmingly, it just felt like such a pristine environment. I mean, what the sort of environmental procedures on a trip like this to ensure that we leave these sort of places, as they were.
Absolutely.
As we found them?
I mean, that's such an important thing, isn't it? And that's absolutely the case for all of our trips, but here even more so. So you carry everything in and you carry everything out. That's a starting point for absolutely everything. In some cases, as I'm doing here, you can burn some paper. So this is me burning toilet paper. So in this camp we were working on a glacier, so we had a toilet area of a crack in the ice, so a small crevasse that we used as a toilet. So we're leaving feces there, but everything else came out, and we bagged it up, and then we burnt it, so it was burnt to nothing. All the other stuff we carried out, all of the food packets, any of the glass or tin or wrappers or anything of that, we were absolutely fastidious about making sure we carried it out. It does mean, of course, like this picture, you carry some big bags. So, excuse me, as we got to our first camp next to the field, we had a camp and we left a fair bit of stuff there. But then we carried over 2 days all the stuff up to our high camp, if you like, to do some peaks from. And then on the last day, we decided actually to do that all in one carry out, because we'd eaten most of our food. But the bags are still pretty pokey. There were these bags are probably 25 kilos, something like that. So for a lot of people, it's quite a big load to carry out. It is walking downhill. It's walking on sort of flattish glacier going down hills, but this was definitely the day of biggest carry. So yeah, to answer your question, yeah, carry everything in, carry everything out, and making sure we don't leave any trace whatsoever. I mean, you can look at that environment. That was our camp. That was our last camp, ready for the boats to pick us up the following morning. So we had a real sort of absolutely in the middle of nowhere feeling. It's hours and hours from any other human habitation at all. And this is our last night, ready for the boats to come in the following sort of morning, really. The boats were forecast to sort of come in about 9-10 o'clock the following morning. So we had this last meal, and we found some wood washed up on the beach. It was fantastic to have this sort of campfire at the end of the trip, and sort of package everything up and get ready to leave. When we got up in the following morning, I sort of remembered the polar bear that we'd seen, and I've been cleaning, and Alan and I have been cleaning our rifles every day to make sure they were serviceable. But I got up that following morning and I thought, I'm just going to give this an extra clean, just make sure it works properly as a bit of a just in case measure, in case we see more polar bears. We were next to the fjord. We were in a position where we thought, well, there might be some bears. We're going to be traveling with our food, etc., etc. So it's the last picture of me cleaning a rifle, thinking about a polar bear, and below me, if it snuck up behind me, was my little fox friend that had come to visit. You can just see it tucked behind my shoulder there. So Alan managed to snap this photo. It's a lovely picture of me just cleaning a rifle, just getting ready to travel back. So yeah, stunning place, amazing journey. And as you said earlier, I'm hoping to go back there in July with a smaller team. It's just me and a small team, and going back to a similar area, but certainly not the same area, to do much of the same, really. Hopefully I'll see the fox again. Polar bear, not so sure. I wouldn't mind seeing a polar bear again if it's in the sea. Don't really want to see it on land though, if it's possible this time. Yeah. So yeah, stunning, amazing trip. Yeah, one of the best I've done. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thanks, Ed, for that. I think it's given us a real insight into a trip that's probably quite different from a lot of the other trips that we do. Yeah. If people want to ask any questions now, then feel free to go ahead, and I'll read them out to Ed. But yeah, I mean, I suppose one thing that's quite different about Greenland is, you just don't have the issues around altitude. So from a sort of a leader point of view, you don't have those, concerns, with respect to people's sort of health and altitude and things. Does that make it easier? Or I suppose you've got other things that you having to deal with?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's the thing that makes our trips longest, isn't it? Really, is the consideration about acclimatization. If you think of lots of trips that we do in lots of the other greater ranges, we're getting to a similar point that I guess our base camp is, where we're arriving in Greenland via a boat. We would have maybe taken 10 days to get to that point in some cases, in other trips in the Himalayas. So to completely take that out, of all nature, is really quite interesting. It certainly makes a medical kit a bit smaller, that's for sure. So there's no altitude drugs at all. There's no drugs, to do with coping for cerebral edema, pulmonary edema, any of those sort of things. There is, though, of course, in the back of my mind that we were using solid liquid fuel stoves, and if anyone was going to get any burns from using those, then we would have had to get them out pretty fast, and so with a sat phone to call people back in. But in terms of other other things that went wrong, in terms of medical stuff, it's very limited really. So yeah, the altitude element was really quite interesting. You're on very, very sort of similar ground that you would be on a, let's say, a 4,000 meter peak in the Alps, or a 5,000, 600,000 meter peak in South America or the Himalayas, but you were from sea level. Yeah, incredible.
We've got a question here from Mark. He says, "Hi Ed, how cold did it get to at night? Was the trip in the summer? You must go through a lot of fuel to cook and burn waste, etc. How much fuel was each person carrying for the trip?"
Yeah, good question. So we're carrying white gas, Coleman gas. So it's pretty efficient to burn because it's in a pressurized petrol burner stove, Whisperlite Internationals we had. And they're pretty efficient at coping with fuel. You're melting snow and you're melting ice, as we were on the first part. So each person, gosh, I think each person probably used 1.5 litres of white gas, I'd think, by the time the end of the trip was there. So yeah, a reasonable amount. We weren't carrying all that, of course, at the time. We had a larger fuel bottle and then a smaller fuel bottle for each stove. So each stove was being fueled up on a daily basis. And we're only cooking water. That's the other thing as well. So we're only heating water, boiling water, so you can put it into dehydrated food. So you're not keeping those stoves on for a massive amount of time. And then at the end of the trip, when we were burning waste, we only burnt waste at the end of the trip. So we sort of made a rubbish bag up in effect, and then burnt that all at the end, and used some of that white gas to burn that. But effectively, that was just a match really, and making a small bonfire. So yeah, the fuel was well worked out. We certainly had fuel left. We took extra, as you always would do. We had an extra stove with us as well in case one broke. So yeah, we were thinking in terms of just in case measures really, because again you're just miles from anywhere. You need to take everything with you. You don't want to on your first night decide that half your stoves aren't going to work. So there was a lot of checking out and a lot of training folks, I guess, in the first couple of days to make sure we were using that stuff properly and efficiently as well.
Sure. Charlie's got a question. He said, you mentioned the group here are quite experienced. Could you give an idea what courses, trips would get people to the right level if they were interested, i.e. Scottish Winter Mountaineering, Mont Blanc Summit, etc.?
Yeah, there was a real mix. I think the most experienced person on this trip was leading rock climbs up to VS, HVS, and they've been doing that for many years. They've been to 5,000-6,000 meters many times. A lot of time in the Alps. I think the person that had done least amount was someone that had seconded rock climbs, but never led a rock climb, had been to the Alps, had been to altitude at maybe 4,000 or 5,000 meters, and certainly had camped in wild situations before, remote camping. That was a bit of a key, actually, that everyone had to be able to administer themselves properly and be able to look after themselves in that sort of remote environment. So if people had only ever been to the Alps and only ever done stuff from huts, then this would be a hell of a shock. you know, so people definitely should have had some expedition experience before. So in terms of courses and in terms of stuff, definitely climbing in Scotland, I would say, would really help. So our winter mountaineering course would get you to the right skill level. To have done a bunch of wild camping, both in the UK and abroad, and if you've been to altitude, you know, in the Alps, probably, I think that probably would have helped as well, because that probably then means that you've travelled over some glaciers. So the altitude in terms of the numbers isn't obviously a big issue, because this isn't really altitude, but travelling over glaciers is quite a big thing, I'd have thought, really. If these are the first glaciers you've ever seen, that would be quite a shock, I'd have said.
Sure. Okay, let's move on to another couple of questions. I just want to acknowledge V also asked a sort of similar question along those lines. So yeah, hopefully you've answered that for her. So Flavia here is asking, you know, in terms of animals, apart from obviously the polar bears we talked about and the Arctic fox, are there, you know, is there much many other, you know, birds, wildlife?
Yeah, there's hi Flavia. There's the bird life when we were nearer civilization was pretty interesting. Similar bird life that we would get in the UK in terms of cormorants and gulls and those sort of things. But again, as soon as you get away from the conurbations, as soon as you get away from people, that wildlife just sank away, really. The interest in wildlife was actually the fauna, really, the flowers and the sort of growth that you get in the sort of interglacial environments, really. So the mosses and the lichens and the small alpine flowers that you got were probably the most interesting thing, actually. But there were no small rodents that you'd expect in other sort of mountainous regions. It was all based around the sea, really. The sea there is very rich and is teeming with life. So as I say, we saw seals, we saw whales, and you know, lots of sea life as we were travelling from place to place, but very little bird life.
Sure.
Yeah, but very small amount. You know, yes.
Liam here has got a couple of questions. We'll just I'll ask you one of them now, and then probably come back to the other one. He's asking, how much weight did people typically lose? Is it a bit of a pre-trip? Is a bit of pre-trip blubber desirable?
Excellent. If this is the Liam I'm thinking it might be. Good question, Liam. Like it. Liam and I have maybe travelled before, if this is the same Liam. No, because of the type of food that we're eating, the dehydrated food is often quite high calorie. So each meal was between 600 and 1,000 calories each meal. So no, we were pretty well fed, actually. And lunches, we were having cheese, salami, wraps, flapjack, nuts, chocolate, you know, blah blah blah. I feel hungry all the time. Anyone that knows me, and I was pretty well catered for, actually. The provisioning we did before we went was well worked out. So no, we were certainly getting in 4,500, 5,000 calories a day. That was pretty easy, really. So no, pre-trip blubber is not necessary on this particular trip, Liam. No, you can thin away as much as you like. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, Robert's just got a short question here. Does it get dark at all?
Dark, no. Does it lose daylight? Yes. So from about 10 o'clock through to about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, it goes dull, but not that I would call dark. It's like a very sort of about 10 o'clock UK summer time. It would be that sort of darkness. So it's just dull, really. But you needed a head torch to find things in your tent, but certainly outside of your tent, you wouldn't need a head torch at all. You know, so I only took a really small basic head torch, and that was absolutely enough. Some people found that a little bit difficult, actually, to sleep with. I can sleep anywhere, but folks needed some eye covering, A couple of folks put buffs over their eyes to sleep and stuff like that. And someone else had like an airline thing to go over their eyes. So that does take some getting used to. So we definitely stuck by a routine, because it didn't feel like it was 11 o'clock at night when we were still up and it was still sunny type thing. So we stay to a routine to make sure that our bodies are kept to it, really. But dark, no, it doesn't get dark at all.
Okay, and here's $1 million question from Liam as well. Hi, Ed and Tom. Are you cautiously optimistic that this trip might go ahead this July?
Well, there you go. That is the $1 million question, isn't it? If it's down to me, yes. If it's down to Tom, yes. If it's down to the rest of the world and the coronavirus, who knows? Who knows? Certainly, as you know, as Tom's already discussed, we want to make this trip work this July. We're certainly working on it, working in July. We're certainly planning on that happening in July. You know, who knows? I wouldn't want to sort of say any more than that, really. I certainly have got nothing else in my diary for that period of time. And, you know, all of my mental preparation is that I'm still going to Greenland in July. But, you know, let's just wait and see. Yeah.
Okay, Ed. Well, that was great. Really enjoyed that. So yeah, thank you for taking us on that journey through Greenland.
That's right.
Okay, so if you want to find out a bit more about that trip, or you know, feel free to drop Ed an email, ed@jagged-globe.co.uk, or indeed about any of our trips. Ed is always happy to talk to people. He's led a hell of a lot of expeditions over the years to all sorts of places. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. So I'd just like to thank you for joining the session today, and we hope to see you again next week. As I mentioned earlier, Andy Owen will be providing an insight into ski touring at the same time next week. So even if you're a beginner skier, Andy will give you a sense of where your skiing needs to be and what you can expect if you get into more adventurous off-piste skiing and ski touring. So be sure to tune in for that. And finally, I'd just like to mention our current campaign to raise money for our staff and Sherpas in Nepal. There's URL on the slide here, but we have a GoFundMe page, which is also linked off the news page on our website. We're currently about 2/3 of the way through trying to reach our target of £8,848 to help support our staff in Nepal, who have had no income from what would have been obviously the spring trekking and climbing season. But thanks obviously to those who've already been so generous with their support helping this campaign. So that's it, folks. Thanks again, and we look forward to sharing some more stories and information about adventures in the mountains with you next week and beyond. So that's it from us. Goodbye.